Chapter 9: Social Emotional Development in Early Childhood. Chapter Objectives. After this chapter, you should be able to describe how preschoolers view themselves, summarize Erikson's stage of initiative versus guilt, discuss the progression of social emotional development during early childhood, explain how children develop their understanding of gender, compare and contrast different styles of parenting, define characteristics of high-quality childcare, discuss the role of siblings and peers, describe the types of play, summarize the influences on social and emotional competence, identify the effects of stress on 3 to 5-year-olds. Introduction. In early childhood, children's understanding of themselves and their role in the world expands greatly. Social and emotional milestones. Milestones represent what most children, 75% or more, can do by specific ages. This chart represents the new and improved milestone charts provided by the CDC in 2022, with substantial evidence-based updates. These milestone charts are meant to prompt surveillance and conversation, and, if needed, identification and early intervention. The CDC adopts a proactive stance. We should take action early when developmental concerns arise, rather than a perspective of waiting to see if a child catches up. While children do develop at individual paces, being proactive during these critical early years is essential. The chart below lists milestones that, if children are not achieving by specific ages, caregivers should encourage parents to communicate with their family's pediatrician. Most caregivers are not professionally trained to officially assess the developmental abilities of children. However, caregivers have the ability to track developmental progress and are often the first to notice developmental concerns. By age 3, most children calm down within 10 minutes after you leave, like at a childcare drop-off. Notice other children and join them to play.
Whoa, license.
By 4 years of age, most children pretend to be something else during play. Teacher, superhero, dog.
I'm gonna be a fireman.
And what are you gonna do?
Put out the fire.
You're gonna put out the fire?
And when we pretend there's a fire, I'll say, "Don't be scared, everyone.
Don't be
I'm a
scared."
fireman.
Like that-
I can protect you.
Like
guys."
firefighter Will when he came in? Yeah.
Asked to go play with children if none are around. Like, can I play with Alex?
Can I play with Jack?
Yes, you can go play with Jack. There we go.
Comfort others who are hurt or sad, like hugging a crying friend. Avoid danger, like not jumping from tall heights at the playground. Like to be a helper.
Shrimpy, can you bring me the oranges? Thank you. How many we got? 1, 2.
Change behavior based on where they are. Place of worship, library, playground.
Oh my goodness, look at his room. You see that?
Yeah.
Is it clean?
Yeah, no.
No, it's not clean.
No, he can play.
Yes, it says every day when I wake up, the first thing I do, I get dressed.
By 5 years of age, most children follow rules or take turns when playing games with other children. Sing, dance, or act for you.
Well, I made up a song this morning,
You did. I definitely want to hear that.
but I don't know what I should name it.
Well, sing it and then maybe we can figure it out.
Beaches, beaches, there's
do simple chores at home, like matching socks or cleaning the table after eating. Many things influence how children develop those milestones, as how they view themselves and how they interact with those around them changes. Let's look more at these. Interactionism and views of self. Early childhood is a time of forming an initial sense of self. A self-concept or idea of who we are, what we are capable of doing, and how we think and feel is a social process that involves taking into consideration how others view us. So, in order to develop a sense of self, you must have interaction with others. Interactionist theorists Cooley and Mead offer two interesting explanations of how a sense of self develops. Cooley. Charles Horton Cooley, 1964, suggests that our self-concept comes from looking at how others respond to us. This process, known as the looking glass self, involves looking at how others seem to view us and interpreting this as we make judgments about whether we are good or bad, strong or weak, beautiful or ugly, and so on. Of course, we do not always interpret their responses accurately, so our self-concept is not simply a mere reflection of the views of others. After forming an initial self-concept, we may use it as a mental filter, screening out those responses that do not seem to fit our ideas of who we are. Some compliments may be negated, for example. The process of the looking glass self is pronounced when we are preschoolers, or perhaps when we are in a new school or job, or taking on a new role in our personal lives and are trying to gauge our own performances. When we feel more sure of who we are, we focus less on how we appear to others. Mead. Herbert Mead, 1967, offers an explanation of how we develop a social sense of self by being able to see ourselves through the eyes of others. There are two parts of the self. The I, which is the part of the self that is spontaneous, creative, innate, and is not concerned with how others view us. And the me, or the social definition of who we are. When we are born, we are all I, and act without concern about how others view us. But the socialized self begins when we are able to consider how one important person views us. This initial stage is called taking the role of the significant other. For example, a child may pull a cat's tail and be told by his mother, "No, don't do that, that's bad," while receiving a slight slap on the hand. Later, the child may mimic the same behavior toward the self and say aloud, "No, that's bad," while patting his own hand. What has happened? The child is able to see himself through the eyes of the mother. As the child grows and is exposed to many situations and rules of culture, he begins to view the self in the eyes of many others through these cultural norms or rules. This is referred to as taking the role of the generalized other, and results in a sense of self with many dimensions. The child comes to have a sense of self as student, as friend, as son, and so on. Exaggerated sense of self. One of the ways to gain a clearer sense of self is to exaggerate those qualities that are to be incorporated into the self. Preschoolers often like to exaggerate their own qualities or to seek validation as the biggest, smartest, or child who can jump the highest. This exaggeration tends to be replaced by a more realistic sense of self in middle childhood. Self-esteem. Early childhood is a time of forming an initial sense of self. Self-concept is our self-description according to various categories, such as our external and internal qualities. In contrast, self-esteem is an evaluative judgment about who we are. The emergence of cognitive skills in this age group results in improved perceptions of the self, but they tend to focus on external qualities, which are referred to as the categorical self. When researchers ask young children to describe themselves, their descriptions tend to include physical descriptors, preferred activities, and favorite possessions. Thus, the self-description of a 3-year-old might be a 3-year-old girl with red hair who likes to play with blocks. However, even children as young as 3 know there is more to themselves than these external characteristics. Harder and Pike, 1984, challenged the method of measuring personality with an open-ended question, as they felt that language limitations were hindering the ability of young children to express their self-knowledge. They suggested a change to the method of measuring self-concept in young children, whereby researchers provide statements that ask whether something is true of the child, such as, "I like to boss people around," "I'm grumpy most of the time." They discovered that in early childhood, children answer these statements in an internally consistent manner, especially after the age of 4, and often give similar responses to what others, parents and teachers, say about the child. Young children tend to have a generally positive self-image. This optimism is often the result of a lack of social comparison when making self-evaluations, and with comparison between what the child once could do to what they can do now. However, this does not mean that preschool children are exempt from negative self-evaluations. Preschool children with insecure attachments to their caregivers tend to have lower self-esteem at age 4. Maternal negative affect, emotional state, was also found by Goodwin and her colleagues to produce more negative self-evaluations in preschool children. Self-control. Self-control is not a single phenomenon, but is multifaceted. It includes response initiation, the ability to not initiate a behavior before you have evaluated all of the information. Response inhibition, the ability to stop a behavior that has already begun. And delayed gratification, the ability to hold out for a larger reward by foregoing a smaller immediate reward. It is in early childhood that we see the start of self-control, a process that takes many years to fully develop. In the now classic marshmallow test, children are confronted with the choice of a small immediate reward, a marshmallow, and a larger delayed reward, more marshmallows. Researchers over the years have found that the ability to delay gratification at the age of 4 predicted better academic performance and health later in life. Self-control is related to executive function. As executive function improves, children become less impulsive. Self-control and play. Thanks to the New Center for Research on Play in Education, Development, and Learning, Whitebread, Baker, Gibson, and a team of researchers hope to provide evidence on the role played by play in how a child develops. A strong possibility is that play supports the early development of children's self-control, explains Baker. These are our abilities to develop awareness of our own thinking processes. They influence how effectively we go about undertaking challenging activities. In a study carried out by Baker with toddlers and young preschoolers, she found that children with greater self-control solved problems quicker when exploring an unfamiliar setup requiring scientific reasoning, regardless of their IQ. This sort of evidence makes us think that giving children the chance to play will make them more successful and creative problem solvers in the long run. If playful experiences do facilitate this aspect of development, say the researchers, it could be extremely significant for educational practices because the ability to self-regulate has been shown to be a key predictor of academic performance. Gibson adds, playful behavior is also an important indicator of healthy social and emotional development. In my previous research, I investigated how observing children at play can give us important clues about their well-being and can even be useful in the diagnosis of neurodevelopmental disorders like autism. Erikson, initiative versus guilt. Psychologist Erik Erikson argues that children in early childhood go through a stage of initiative versus guilt. If the child is placed in an environment where he or she can explore, make decisions, and initiate activities, they have achieved initiative. On the other hand, if the child is put in an environment where initiation is repressed through criticism and control, he or she will develop a sense of guilt. The trust and autonomy of the previous stage develops into a desire to take initiative or to think of ideas and initiative action. Children may want to build a fort with the cushions from the living room couch, or open a lemonade stand in the driveway, or make a zoo with their stuffed animals and issue tickets to those who want to come. Or they may just want to get themselves ready for bed without any assistance. To reinforce taking initiative, caregivers should offer praise for the child's efforts and avoid being critical of messes or mistakes. Soggy wash rags and toothpaste left in the sink pales in comparison to the smiling face of a 5-year-old that emerges from the bathroom with clean teeth and pajamas. Gender identity, gender constancy, and gender roles. Another important dimension of the self is the sense of self as male or female. Preschool-age children become increasingly interested in finding out the differences between boys and girls, both physically and in terms of what activities are acceptable for each. While 2-year-olds can identify some differences and learn whether they are boys or girls, preschoolers become more interested in what it means to be male or female. This self-identification or gender identity is followed somewhat later with gender constancy, or the knowledge that gender does not change. Gender roles, or the rights and expectations that are associated with being male or female, are learned throughout childhood and into adulthood. Freud and the phallic stage. Freud believed that masculinity and femininity were learned during the phallic stage of psychosexual development. According to Freud, during the phallic stage, the child develops an attraction to the opposite sex parent, but after recognizing that they cannot actually be romantically involved with that parent, the child learns to model their own behavior after the same-sex parent. The child develops his or her own sense of masculinity or femininity from this resolution. And, according to Freud, a person who does not exhibit gender-appropriate behavior, such as a woman who competes with men for jobs or a man who lacks self-assurance and dominance, has not successfully completed this stage of development. Consequently, such a person continues to struggle with his or her own gender identity. Chodorow and mothering. Chodorow, a neo-Freudian, believed that mothering promotes gender stereotypic behavior. Mothers push their sons away too soon and direct their attention toward problem-solving and independence. As a result, sons grow up confident in their own abilities but uncomfortable with intimacy. Girls are kept dependent too long and are given unnecessary and even unwelcome assistance from their mothers. Girls learn to underestimate their abilities and lack assertiveness, but feel comfortable with intimacy. Both of these models assume that early childhood experiences result in lifelong gender self-concepts. However, gender socialization is a process that continues throughout life. Children, teens, and adults refine and can modify their sense of self based on gender. Learning through reinforcement and modeling. Learning theorists suggest that gender role socialization is a result of the ways in which parents, teachers, friends, schools, religious institutions, media, and others send messages about what is acceptable or desirable behavior as males or females. This socialization begins early. In fact, it may even begin the moment a parent learns that a child is on the way. Knowing the sex of the child can conjure up images of the child's behavior, appearance, and potential on the part of a parent. And this stereotyping continues to guide perception through life. Consider parents of newborns, shown a 7-pound, 20-inch baby wrapped in blue, a color designating males. Describe the child as tough, strong, and angry when crying. Shown the same infant in pink, a color used in the United States for baby girls. These parents are likely to describe the baby as pretty, delicate, and frustrated when crying. Female infants are held more, talked to more frequently, and given direct eye contact, while male infants' play is often mediated through a toy or activity. Sons are given tasks that take them outside the house and that have to be performed only on occasion, while girls are more likely to be given chores inside the home, such as cleaning or cooking, that is performed daily. Sons are encouraged to think for themselves when they encounter problems, and daughters are more likely to be given assistance even when they are working on an answer. This impatience is reflected in teachers waiting less time when asking a female student for an answer than when asking for a reply from a male student. Girls are given a message from teachers that they must try harder and endure in order to succeed, while boys' successes are attributed to their intelligence. Of course, the stereotypes of advisors can also influence which kinds of courses or vocational choices girls and boys are encouraged to make. Friends discuss what is acceptable for boys and girls, and popularity may be based on modeling what is considered ideal behavior or looks for the sexes. Girls tend to tell one another secrets to validate others as best friends, while boys compete for position by emphasizing their knowledge, strength, or accomplishments. This focus on accomplishments can even give rise to exaggerating accomplishments in boys, but girls are discouraged from showing off and may learn to minimize their accomplishments as a result. Gender messages abound in our environment. But does this mean that each of us receives and interprets these messages in the same way? Probably not. In addition to being recipients of these cultural expectations, we are individuals who also modify these roles. Based on what young children learn about gender from parents, peers, and those who they observe in society, children develop their own conceptions of these attributes associated with maleness or femaleness, which is referred to as gender schemas. How much does gender matter? In the United States, gender differences are found in school experiences. Even into college and professional school, girls are less vocal in the classrooms and much more at risk for sexual harassment from teachers, coaches, classmates, and professors. In social interactions, and in media messages. These stereotypes that boys should be strong, forceful, active, dominant, and rational, and that girls should be pretty, subordinate, unintelligent, emotional, and gabby, are portrayed in children's toys, books, commercials, video games, movies, television shows, and music. In adulthood, these differences are reflected in income gaps between men and women, where women working full-time earn about 74% the income of men, in higher rates of women suffering rape and domestic violence, higher rates of eating disorders for females, and in higher rates of violent death for men in young adulthood. Each of these differences will be explored further in subsequent chapters. Gender dysphoria. A growing body of research is now focused on gender dysphoria, or the distress accompanying a mismatch between one's gender identity and biological sex. Although prevalence rates are low, at approximately 0.3% of the United States population, children who later identify as transgender often stated that they were the opposite gender as soon as they began talking. Comments such as stating they prefer the toys, clothing, and anatomy of the opposite sex, while rejecting the toys, clothing, and anatomy of their assigned sex, are criteria for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria in children. Certainly, many young children do not conform to the gender roles modeled by the culture and even push back against assigned roles. However, they do not experience discomfort regarding their gender identity and would not be identified with gender dysphoria. A more comprehensive description of gender dysphoria, including current treatments, will be discussed in the chapter on adolescence. Family life. Relationships between parents and children continue to play a significant role in children's development during early childhood. We will explore two models of parenting styles. Keep in mind that most parents do not follow any model completely. Real people tend to fall somewhere in between these styles, and sometimes parenting styles change from one child to the next, or in times when the parent has more or less time and energy for parenting. Parenting styles can also be affected by concerns the parent has in other areas of his or her life. For example, parenting styles tend to become more authoritarian when parents are tired, and perhaps more authoritative when they are more energetic. Sometimes parents seem to change their parenting approach when others are around, maybe because they become more self-conscious as parents or are concerned with giving others the impression that they are a tough parent or an easygoing parent. And of course, parenting styles may reflect the type of parenting someone saw modeled while growing up. Diana Baumrind. Baumrind, 1971, offers a model of parenting that includes 4 styles. The first, authoritarian, is the traditional model of parenting in which parents make the rules and children are expected to be obedient. Baumrind suggests that authoritarian parents tend to place maturity demands on their children that are unreasonably high and tend to be aloof and distant. Consequently, children reared in this way may fear rather than respect their parents, and because their parents do not allow discussion, may take out their frustrations on safer targets, perhaps as bullies toward peers. Permissive parenting involves holding expectations of children that are below what could be reasonably expected from them. Children are allowed to make their own rules and determine their own activities. Parents are warm and communicative, but provide little structure for their children. Children fail to learn self-discipline and may feel somewhat insecure because they do not know the limits. Authoritative parenting involves being appropriately strict, reasonable, and affectionate. Parents allow negotiation where appropriate, and discipline matches the severity of the offense. A popular parenting program that is offered in many school districts is called Love and Logic, and reflects the authoritative or democratic style of parenting just described. Uninvolved parents, also referred to as rejecting, neglecting, are disengaged from their children. They do not make demands on their children and are non-responsive. These children can suffer in school and in their relationships with their peers. Lemasters and Dufresne. Lemasters and Dufresne, 1989, offer another model of parenting. This model is interesting because it looks more closely at the motivations of the parent and suggests that parenting styles are often designed to meet the psychological needs of the parent rather than the developmental needs of the child. The martyr is a parent who will do anything for the child, even tasks that the child should do for himself or herself. All of the good deeds performed for the child in the name of being a good parent may be used later should the parent want to gain compliance from the child. If a child goes against the parent's wishes, the parent can remind the child of all the times the parent helped the child and evoke a feeling of guilt so the child will do what the parent wants. The child learns to be dependent and manipulative as a result. The pal is like the permissive parent described previously in Baumrind's model. The pal wants to be the child's friend, Perhaps the parent is lonely, or perhaps the parent is trying to win a popularity contest against an ex-spouse. Pals let children do what they want and focus mostly on being entertaining and fun, and set few limitations. Consequently, the child may have little self-discipline and may try to test limits with others. The police officer, drill sergeant style of parenting is similar to the authoritarian parent described by Baumrind. The parent focuses primarily on making sure the child is obedient and that the parent has full control of the child. Sometimes this can be taken to extreme by giving the child tasks that are really designed to check on their level of obedience. For example, the parent may require that the child fold the clothes and place items back into the drawer in a particular way. If not, the child might be scolded or punished for not doing things right. This type of parent has a very difficult time allowing the child to grow and learn to make decisions independently. And the child may have a lot of resentment toward the parent that is displaced on others. The teacher, counselor parent is one who pays a lot of attention to expert advice on parenting and who believes that as long as all the steps are followed, the parent can rear a perfect child. What's wrong with that, you might ask? There are two major problems with this approach. First, the parent is taking all of the responsibility for the child's behavior, at least indirectly. If the child has difficulty, the parent feels responsible and thinks that the solution lies in reading more advice and trying more diligently to follow that advice. Parents can certainly influence children, but thinking that the parent is fully responsible for the child's outcome is misguided. A parent can only do so much and can never have full control over the child. Another problem with this approach is that the child may get an unrealistic sense of the world and what can be expected from others. For example, if a teacher, counselor, parent decides to help the child build self-esteem and has read that telling the child how special he or she is or how important it is to compliment the child on a job well done, the parent may convey the message that everything the child does is exceptional or extraordinary. A child may come to expect that all of his efforts warrant praise, and in the real world, this is not something one can expect. Perhaps children get more of a sense of pride from assessing their own performance than having others praise their efforts. So what is left? LeMasters and Dufresne, 1989, suggests that the athletic coach style of parenting is best. Before you draw conclusions here, set aside any negative experiences you may have had with coaches in the past. The principles of coaching are what are important to LeMasters and Dufresne. A coach helps players form strategies, supports their efforts, gives feedback on what went right and what went wrong, and stands at the sideline while the players perform. Coaches and referees make sure that the rules of the game are followed and that all players adhere to those rules. Similarly, the athletic coach, as parent, helps the child understand what needs to happen in certain situations, whether in friendships, school, or home life, and encourages and advises the child about how to manage these situations. The parent does not intervene or do things for the child. Their role is to provide guidance while the child learns firsthand how to handle these situations. And the rules for behavior are consistent and objective and presented in that way. So a child who is late for dinner might hear the parent respond in this way: "Dinner was at 6 o'clock. Rather than, "You know good and well that we always eat at 6. If you expect me to get up and make something for you now, you've got another thing coming. Just who do you think you are, showing up late and looking for food? You're grounded until further notice." The most important thing to remember about parenting is that you can be a better, more objective parent when you are directing your actions toward the child's needs and while considering what they can reasonably be expected to do at their stage of development. Parenting is more difficult when you are tired and have psychological needs that interfere with the relationship. Some of the best advice for parents is to try not to take the child's actions personally and be as objective as possible. Cultural influences on parenting styles. The impact of class and culture cannot be ignored when examining parenting styles. The two models of parenting described above assume that authoritative and athletic coaching styles are best because they are designed to help the parent raise a child who is independent, self-reliant, and responsible. These are qualities favored in individualistic cultures, such as the United States, particularly by the white middle class. African American, Hispanic, and Asian parents tend to be more authoritarian than non-Hispanic whites. In collectivist cultures such as China or Korea, being obedient and compliant are favored behaviors. Authoritarian parenting has been used historically and reflects the cultural need for children to do as they are told. In societies where family members' cooperation is necessary for survival, as in the case of raising crops, rearing children who are independent and who strive to be on their own makes no sense. But in an economy based on being mobile in order to find jobs, and where one's earnings are based on education, raising a child to be independent is very important. Working class parents are more likely than middle class parents to focus on obedience and honesty when raising their children. In a classic study on social class and parenting styles called Class and Conformity, explains that parents tend to emphasize qualities that are needed for their own survival when parenting their children. Working class parents are rewarded for being obedient, reliable, and honest in their jobs. They are not paid to be independent or to question the management. Rather, they move up and are considered good employees if they show up on time, do their work as they are told, and can be counted on by their employers. Consequently, these parents reward honesty and obedience in their children. Middle-class parents who work as professionals are rewarded for taking initiative, being self-directed, and assertive in their jobs. They are required to get the job done without being told exactly what to do. They are asked to be innovative and to work independently. These parents encourage their children to have those qualities as well by rewarding independence and self-reliance. Parenting styles can reflect many elements of culture. Spanking. Many adults can remember being spanked as a child. This method of discipline continues to be endorsed by the majority of parents. Just how effective is spanking, however, and are there any negative consequences? After reviewing the research, one report stated, "Many studies have shown that physical punishment, including spanking, hitting, and other means of causing pain, can lead to increased aggression, antisocial behavior, physical injury, and mental health problems for children." Gershoff, 2008, reviewed decades of research and recommended that parents and caregivers make every effort to avoid physical punishment and called for the banning of physical discipline in all U.S. schools. Gershoff and colleagues, 2016, completed another meta-analysis that looked at over 160,000 children. They found increased risk for negative outcomes for children who were spanked, and that effects of spanking were similar to that of physical abuse. In a longitudinal study that followed more than 1,500 families from 20 U.S. cities, parents' reports of spanking were assessed at ages 3 and 5. Measures of externalizing behavior, aggression and rule breaking, and receptive vocabulary were assessed at age 9. Overall, 57% of mothers and 40% of fathers engaged in spanking when children were age 3, and 52% of mothers and 33% of fathers engaged in spanking at age 5. Maternal spanking at age 5, even at low levels, was associated with higher levels of aggression at age 9. Even after an array of risks and earlier child behavior were controlled for. Fathers' high-frequency spanking at age 5 was associated with lower child receptive vocabulary scores at age 9. This study revealed the negative cognitive effects of spanking in addition to the increase in aggressive behavior. Internationally, physical discipline is increasingly being viewed as a violation of children's human rights. 30 countries have banned the use of physical punishment, and the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, 2014, called physical punishment legalized violence against children, and advocated that physical punishment be eliminated in all settings. Alternatives to spanking are advocated by child development specialists and include praising and modeling appropriate behavior, providing timeouts for inappropriate behavior, giving choices, helping the child identify emotions and learning to calm down, ignoring small annoyances, withdrawing privileges, changing families in a changing society. The sociology of the family examines the family as an institution and a unit of socialization. Sociological studies of the family look at demographic characteristics of the family members, family size, age, ethnicity and gender of its members, social class of the family, the economic level and mobility of the family, professions of its members, and the education levels of the family members. Currently, one of the biggest issues that sociologists study are the changing roles of family members. Often, each member is restricted by the gender roles of the traditional family. These roles, such as the father as the breadwinner and the mother as the homemaker, are declining. Now, the mother is often the supplementary provider, while retaining the responsibilities of child rearing. In this scenario, females' role in the labor force is compatible with the demands of the traditional family. Sociology studies the adaptation of males' roles to caregiver as well as provider. The gender roles are increasingly interwoven. Diverse family forms. A single-parent family usually refers to a parent who has most of the day-to-day responsibilities in the raising of the child or children, who is not living with a spouse or partner, or who is not married. The dominant caregiver is the parent with whom their children reside the majority of the time. If the parents are separated or divorced, children live with their custodial parent and have visitation with their non-custodial parent. In Western society, in general, following separation, a child will end up with the primary caregiver, usually the mother, and a secondary caregiver, usually the father. There is a growing community of single-parent-by-choice families, in which a family is built by a single adult through foster care, adoption, donor gametes and embryos, and surrogacy. Cohabitation is an arrangement where two people who are not married live together in an intimate relationship, particularly an emotionally and or sexually intimate one, on a long-term or permanent basis. Today, cohabitation is a common pattern among people in the Western world. More than 2/3 of married couples in the U.S. say that they lived together before getting married. Gay and lesbian couples are categorized as same-sex relationships. After a Supreme Court ruling in 2015, all 50 states in the U.S. must recognize same-sex marriage. There are still some counties in several states that will not issue a marriage license to a same-sex couple. Sibling relationships. Siblings spend a considerable amount of time with each other and offer a unique relationship that is not found with same-age peers or with adults. Siblings play an important role in the development of social skills. Cooperative and pretend play interactions between younger and older siblings can teach empathy, sharing, and cooperation, as well as negotiation and conflict resolution. However, the quality of sibling relationships is often mediated by the quality of the parent-child relationship and the psychological adjustment of the child. For instance, More negative interactions between siblings have been reported in families where parents had poor patterns of communication with their children. Children who have emotional and behavioral problems are also more likely to have negative interactions with their siblings. However, the psychological adjustment of the child can sometimes be a reflection of the parent-child relationship. Thus, when examining the quality of sibling interactions, it is often difficult to tease out the separate effect of adjustment from the effect of the parent-child relationship. While parents want positive interactions between their children, conflicts are going to arise, and some confrontations can be the impetus for growth in children's social and cognitive skills. The sources of conflict between siblings often depend on their respective ages. Dunn and Munn, 1987, revealed that over half of all sibling conflicts in early childhood were disputes about property rights. By middle childhood, this starts shifting toward control over social situations, such as what games to play, disagreements about facts or opinions, or rude behavior. Researchers have also found that the strategies children use to deal with conflict change with age, but that this is also tempered by the nature of the conflict. Coercive strategies, such as threats, were preferred when the dispute centered on property rights, while reasoning was more likely to be used by older siblings and in disputes regarding control over the social situation. However, younger siblings also use reasoning, frequently bringing up the concern of legitimacy, such as, "You're not the boss," when in conflict with an older sibling. This is a very common strategy used by younger siblings and is possibly an adaptive strategy in order for younger siblings to assert their autonomy. A number of researchers have found that children who can use non-coercive strategies are more likely to have a successful resolution, whereby a compromise is reached and neither child feels slighted. Not surprisingly, friendly relationships with siblings often lead to more positive interactions with peers. The reverse is also true. A child can also learn to get along with a sibling with, as the song says, a little help from my friends. Child care concerns. About 77.3% of mothers of school-aged and 64.2% of mothers of preschool-aged children in the United States work outside the home. 75% of children under age 5 are in scheduled child care programs. Others are cared for by family members or friends. Older children are often in after-school programs, before-school programs, or stay at home alone after school once they are older. Quality childcare programs can enhance a child's social skills and can provide rich learning experiences. But long hours in poor quality care can have negative consequences, especially for young children. Quality of care. What determines the quality of childcare? One consideration is the teacher-child ratio. States specify the maximum number of children that can be supervised by one teacher. In general, the younger the children, the more teachers required for a given number of children. The lower the teacher-to-child ratio, the more time the teacher has for involvement with the children, and the less stressed the teacher may be, so that the interactions can be more relaxed, stimulating, and positive. Larger group sizes present challenges to quality as well. The program may be more rigid in rules and structure to accommodate the large number of children in the facility. The physical environment should be engaging, clean, and safe. The philosophy of the organization and the curriculum available should be child-centered, positive, and stimulating. Providers should be trained in early childhood education. A majority of states do not require training for their child care providers. And while formal education is not required for a person to provide a warm, loving relationship to a child, knowledge of a child's development is useful for addressing their social, emotional, and cognitive needs in an effective way. By working toward improving the quality of childcare and increasing family-friendly workplace policies, such as more flexible scheduling and perhaps childcare facilities at places of employment, we can accommodate families with smaller children and relieve parents of the stress sometimes associated with managing work and family life. Peers. Relationships within the family, parent, child, and siblings, are not the only significant relationships in a child's life. Peer relationships are also important. Social interaction with another child who is similar in age, skills, and knowledge provokes the development of many social skills that are valuable for the rest of life. In peer relationships, children learn how to initiate and maintain social interactions with other children. They learn skills for managing conflict, such as turn-taking, compromise, and bargaining. Play also involves a mutual, sometimes complex coordination of goals, actions, and understanding. For example, as preschoolers engage in pretend play, they create narratives together, choose roles, and collaborate to act out their stories. Through these experiences, children develop friendships that provide additional sources of security and support to those provided by their parents. However, peer relationships can be challenging as well as supportive. Being accepted by other children is an important source of affirmation and self-esteem, but peer rejection can foreshadow later behavior problems, especially when children are rejected due to aggressive behavior. Peer relationships require developing very different social and emotional skills than those that emerge in parent-child relationships. They also illustrate the many ways that peer relationships influence the growth of personality and self-concept. Play. Freud saw play as a means for children to release pent-up emotions and to deal with emotionally distressing situations in a more secure environment. Vygotsky and Piaget saw play as a way of children developing their intellectual abilities. Piaget created stages of play that correspond with his stages of cognitive development. The stages are functional play, exploring, inspecting, and learning through repetitive physical activity. Symbolic play, the ability to use objects, actions, or ideas to represent other objects, actions, or ideas, and may include taking on roles. Constructive play involves experimenting with objects to build things, learning things that were previously unknown with hands-on manipulations of materials. Games with rules imposes rules that must be followed by everyone that is playing. The logic and order involved forms the foundations of developing game-playing strategies. While Freud, Piaget, and Vygotsky looked at play slightly differently, all three theorists saw play as providing positive outcomes for children. Mildred Parton, 1932, observed 2 to 5-year-old children and noted 6 types of play. 3 types she labeled as non-social, unoccupied, solitary, and onlooker. And 3 types were categorized as social play, parallel, associative, and cooperative. The table below describes each type of play. Younger children engaged in non-social play more than those who are older. By age 5, associative and cooperative play are the most common forms of play. Unoccupied play. Children's behavior seems more random and without a specific goal. This is the least common form of play. Solitary play. Children play by themselves, do not interact with others, nor are they engaging in similar activities as the children around them. Onlooker play. Children are observing other children playing. They may comment on the activities and even make suggestions, but will not directly join the play. Parallel play. Children play alongside each other, using similar toys, but do not directly act with each other. Associative play. Children will interact with each other and share toys, but are not working toward a common goal. Cooperative play. Children are interacting to achieve a common goal. Children may take on different tasks to reach that goal. Social understanding. As we have seen, children's experience of relationships at home and the peer group contributes to an expanding repertoire of social and emotional skills, and also to broadened social understanding. In these relationships, children develop expectations for specific people, leading, for example, to secure or insecure attachments to parents. Understanding of how to interact with adults and peers, and developing self-concept based on how others respond to them. These relationships are also significant forums for emotional development. Remarkably, young children begin developing social understanding very early in life. Before the end of the first year, infants are aware that other people have perceptions, feelings, and other mental states that affect their behavior, and which are different from the child's own mental states. Carefully designed experimental studies show that by late in the preschool years, young children understand that another's beliefs can be mistaken rather than correct, that memories can affect how you feel, and that one's own emotions can be hidden from others. Social understanding grows significantly as children's theory of mind develops. How do these achievements in social understanding occur? One answer is that young children are remarkably sensitive observers of other people, making connections between their emotional expressions, words, and behavior to derive simple inferences about mental states, concluding, for example, that what mommy is looking at is in her mind. This is especially likely to occur in relationships with people whom the child knows well, consistent with the ideas of attachment theory previously discussed. Growing language skills give young children words with which to represent these mental states, such as mad, wants, and talk about them with others. Thus, in conversation with their parents about everyday experiences, children learn much about people's mental states from how adults talk about them. Your sister was sad because she thought daddy was coming home. Developing social understanding is based on children's everyday interactions with others and their careful interpretations of what they see and hear. There are also some scientists who believe that infants are biologically prepared to perceive people in a special way, as organisms with an internal mental life, and this facilitates their interpretation of people's behavior with reference to those mental states. Personality. Parents often scrutinize their child's preferences, characteristics, and responses for clues of a developing personality. They are quite right to do so because temperament is a foundation for personality growth, but temperament, defined as early emerging differences in reactivity and self-regulation, is not the whole story. Although temperament is biologically based, it interacts with the influence of experience from the moment of birth, if not before, to shape personality. Temperamental dispositions are affected, for example, by the support level of parental care. More generally, personality is shaped by the goodness of fit between the child's temperamental qualities and characteristics of the environment. For example, an adventurous child whose parents regularly take her on weekend hiking and fishing trips would be a good fit to her lifestyle, supporting personality growth. Personality is the result, therefore, of the continuous interplay between biological disposition and experience, as is true for many other aspects of social and personality development. Personality develops from temperament in other ways. As children mature biologically, temperamental characteristics emerge and change over time. A newborn is not capable of much self-control, but as brain-based capacities for self-control advance, temperamental changes in self-regulation become more apparent. So, an infant that cries frequently doesn't necessarily have a grumpy personality. With sufficient parental support and increased sense of security, the child may develop into a content preschooler that is not likely to cry to get her needs met. In addition, personality is made up of many other features besides temperament. Children's developing self-concept, their motivations to achieve or to socialize, their values and goals, their coping styles, their sense of responsibility and conscientiousness, and many other qualities are encompassed into personality. These qualities are influenced by biological dispositions, but even more by the child's experiences with others, particularly in close relationships that guide the growth of individual characteristics. Indeed, personality development begins with the biological foundations of temperament, but becomes increasingly elaborated, extended, and refined over time. The newborn that parents observed and wonder upon becomes an adult with a personality of depth and nuance. Social and emotional competence. Social and personality development is built from the social, biological, and representational influences discussed previously. These influences result in important developmental outcomes that matter to children, parents, and society. A young adult's capacity to engage in socially constructive actions, helping, caring, sharing with others, to curb hostile or aggressive impulses, to live according to meaningful moral values, to develop a healthy identity and sense of self, and to develop talents and achieve success in using them. These are some of the developmental outcomes that denote social and emotional competence. These achievements of social and personality development derive from the interaction of many social, biological, and representational influences. Consider, for example, the development of conscience, which is an early foundation for moral development. Conscience consists of the cognitive, emotional, and social influences that cause young children to create and act consistently with internal standards of conduct. It emerges from young children's experiences with parents, particularly in the development of a mutually responsive relationship that motivates young children to respond constructively to the parents' requests and expectations. Biologically based temperament is involved, as some children are temperamentally more capable of motivated self-regulation, a quality called effortful control, than others, while some children are more prone to the fear and anxiety that parental disapproval can evoke. The development of conscience is influenced by having good fit between the child's temperamental qualities and how parents communicate and reinforce behavioral expectations. Conscience development also expands as young children begin to represent moral values and think of themselves as moral beings. By the end of the preschool years, for example, young children develop a moral self by which they think of themselves as people who want to do the right thing, who feel badly after misbehaving, and who feel uncomfortable when others misbehave. In the development of conscience, young children become more socially and emotionally competent in a manner that provides a foundation for later moral conduct. Childhood stress and development. What is the impact of stress on child development? Children experience different types of stressors. Normal, everyday stress can provide an opportunity for young children to build coping skills and possesses little risk to development. Even more long-lasting, stressful events such as changing schools or losing a loved one can be managed fairly well. But children who experience toxic stress or who live in extremely stressful situations of abuse over long periods of time can suffer long-lasting effects. The structures in the midbrain or limbic system, such as the hippocampus and amygdala, can be vulnerable to prolonged stress during early childhood. High levels of the stress hormone cortisol can reduce the size of the hippocampus and affect the child's memory abilities. Stress hormones can also reduce immunity to disease. The brain, exposed to long periods of severe stress, can develop a low threshold making the child hypersensitive to stress in the future. However, the effects of stress can be minimized if the child has the support of caring adults. Let's take a look at childhood stressors. Effects of domestic abuse. 3.3 million children witness domestic violence each year in the U.S. There's been an increase in acknowledgement that children exposed to domestic abuse during their upbringing will suffer in their developmental and psychological welfare. Because of the awareness of domestic violence that some children have to face, it also generally impacts how the child develops emotionally, socially, behaviorally, as well as cognitively. Some emotional and behavioral problems that can result due to domestic violence include increased aggressiveness, anxiety, and changes in how a child socializes with friends, family, and authorities. Bruises, broken bones, head injuries, lacerations, and internal bleeding are some of the acute effects of a domestic violence incident that require medical attention and hospitalization. Child maltreatment. Child abuse is the physical, sexual, or emotional mistreatment or neglect of a child or children. Different jurisdictions have developed their own definitions of what constitutes child abuse for the purposes of removing a child from his or her family and or persecuting a criminal charge. There are 4 major categories of child abuse: neglect, physical abuse, psychological emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. Neglect is the most common type of abuse in the United States and accounts for over 60% of child abuse cases. Physical abuse. Physical abuse involves physical aggression directed at a child by an adult. Most nations with child abuse laws consider the deliberate infliction of serious injuries or actions that place the child at obvious risk of serious injury or death to be illegal. Beyond this, there is considerable variation. The distinction between child discipline and abuse is often poorly defined. Cultural norms about what constitutes abuse vary widely among professionals, as well as the wider public. Some professionals claim that cultural norms that sanction physical punishment are one of the causes of child abuse, and have undertaken campaigns to redefine such norms. Sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse is a form of child abuse in which an adult or older adolescent abuses a child for sexual stimulation. Effects of child sexual abuse include guilt and self-blame, flashbacks, nightmares, insomnia, and fear of things associated with the abuse. Approximately 15% to 25% of women and 5% to 15% of men were sexually abused when they were children. Emotional abuse. Out of all the possible forms of abuse, emotional abuse is the hardest to define. It could include name-calling, ridicule, degradation, destruction of personal belongings, torture or killing of a pet, excessive criticism, inappropriate or excessive demands, withholding communication, and routine labeling or humiliation. Neglect. Neglect is a passive form of abuse in which a perpetrator is responsible to provide care for a victim who is unable to care for himself or herself, but fails to provide adequate care. Neglect may include the failure to provide sufficient supervision, nourishment, or medical care, or the failure to fulfill other needs for which the victim is helpless to provide for himself or herself. The term is also applied when necessary care is withheld by those responsible for providing it from animals, plants, and even inanimate objects. Neglect can have many long-term side effects, such as physical injuries, low self-esteem, attention disorders, violent behavior, and even death. In the U.S., neglect is defined as the failure to meet the basic needs of children: housing, clothing, food, and access to medical care. Researchers found over 91,000 cases of neglect in 1 year using information from a database of cases verified by protective services agencies. Conclusion. In this chapter, we covered the development of self-concept and self-esteem, Erikson's psychosocial stage of initiative versus guilt, gender identity, gender constancy, gender roles, and gender dysphoria, family life, including parenting styles, diverse forms of families, using childcare, and the role of siblings, the role of peers, the types of play, the social understanding of preschoolers, personality development, social and emotional competencies, the effects of stress on children, including maltreatment. In the next chapter, we begin exploring middle childhood and how children from 6 to 11 grow and develop.